So what's my chance to crit? I have a 60% chance to crit. And then at Path of Exile, it's like, well, you got a 5% base chance, but you got this thing over here that's adding 2.55% to the base, and then you got your 40 times more multiplier, which is multiplicative, plus your 100% increase, which is additive with the other 20%, but don't forget, if you're standing more than 6 feet away, then you got another 50% increase for the... This is what makes it complicated. This is what's new player unfriendly. Path of Exile 2, a game I have been waiting for a very, very long time. As I've got about 175 hours in the game, I think it should go without saying that I am overall enjoying my experience. That being said, this review is largely going to sway negative. And that's because, though I think the game has got good bones and a good foundation, there are some decisions that have been made about the game that I'm not terribly fond of. And as I've got to a point, I've rolled about 3 characters here, and with this most recent one, I'm playing this here, Lightning Arrow Deadeye. I'm at a point where I've kind of got a feel for some of the systems, and that's really what I want to focus on. For the record, I know there's a lot of stuff that kind of feels pressing to the community, to me too, frankly, but a lot of the things are kind of number crunchy, you know, as an example, like the respec costs. From what I understand, there was a patch yesterday that was supposed to be fixed. I haven't really had a chance to interact with it because I'm pretty set on this character, but that kind of stuff, you know, GGG has a long history of kind of playing a game of tug of war there. They want more permanence and stuff in the game, and I tend to appreciate that, but sometimes it can take some back and forth to find the sweet spot. I do think they should have just given a free respec to the people whose builds they nerf. That you're going to lose new players, that's just stingy. But for the most part, whether your build sucks or others are OP, this is just not the kind of thing I'm concerned about. The stuff I'm concerned about is a little bit deeper ingrained in the game. That being said, quick disclaimers before I get into the meat of the video. First of all, I don't think you should have to have 2,000-3,000 hours in a game to have an opinion on it, but if you really need me to, yeah, I got like 3,200 hours in PoE1, so just a beginner. Which could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it, because there could be some bias there. There most certainly is. I will also say I'm pretty malleable when it comes to most of my opinions, like difficulty. I'm not going to talk much about difficulty because whether they keep the real medium core experience that you die at the boss and you got to go back and do the whole thing over again, or if they kind of lighten up on that stuff, I don't really care either way. I'm very flexible on that stuff because I think no matter which way they veer, it's not going to affect my personal enjoyment of the game. But this first topic that I am going to discuss, I am not in the least bit flexible. I do think that this is a mechanic that needs to die. It is a disease to games that needs to be cured. And there's going to be some people who disagree with me, and I'm sorry, but in this particular case, you are just wrong. So with that being said, let's get into it. I'm going to basically split this into 2 categories, which I will call on-death effects and hard CC on the player, which I realize is a little bit more cryptic, but I'll explain what I mean by that later. But let's begin with on-death effects. I do not believe there is any good reason for this to be in the game at all. These mechanics are not fun to engage with. They're very new player unfriendly, and in general, they slow the pace of an already slower game. And to be clear, the more slow-paced, tactical, strategic combat, I think overall is very good. I enjoy that. That is a very stark contrast from what we had in PoE1, but it is absolutely insane to me with the amount of tweaking and toning down and messing around with these blow you up on death effects from Path of Exile 1 that this found a path into the second game. I think a good mechanic involving creatures, monsters, will have you take on a fight a little bit differently than you engage in the game a little bit differently than you otherwise would have. But I think very importantly, also that doesn't break the flow of the game. The argument could be made that waiting 2 or 3 seconds after I have killed every group of enemies is definitely changing the way that I would normally play, but in a way that is completely breaking the flow of the game. It's jarring, and I would argue that in the current pacing of Path of Exile 2, it is almost worse than it was in the original game. And There was a word from the developers a while back on some of these effects, and one of the reasons that they became so prevalent in Path of Exile 1 was we became so zoomy and so fast, and so we cleared things so quickly that one of the only things they could do to provide that sense of challenge was to kind of imbue these corpse explosions and on-death triggers and pools that will happen. And, you know, I gotta say, I think that that's kind of a lie in this context because the pacing is already slower. I'm already in my tier 9 and 10s. I realize it says that I'm currently completing tier 5s. That is a whole story in and of itself that I will get to later. But I've done some tier 9 and 10s kind of up into mid maps. I'm probably in, like, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, early, late game, late mid game, whatever. I already experienced white mobs and magic mobs that don't die to me in one hit. There is just no reason for these on-death effects. They do a lot to diminish the joy of the game. You know, I want to talk a little bit about things that are new player friendly. So let's talk new player friendly. They have changed and dumbed down a lot of systems that I think maybe didn't need to be simplified to the extent that they did. I don't think it is whether or not a new player totally understands crafting or whether or not they are able to intellectualize some of the things that became complicated in the first Path of Exile that would cause them to quit. I don't think it's a boss slam that's going to cause a new player to quit. I don't think the trail up to the next boss fight will. I can guarantee you along that trail, when they encounter a group of magic mobs or a rare, and they kill them, and it's that magic moment. It's like, oh, my first greater jeweler's orb. It's like, yeah, okay. And I've got another support gem that I can put on my main skill. This is great. And boom, you're dead. What's fun about this? What is enjoyable about this? I just really don't understand. I think that by and large, these mechanics are archaic. They hail from the time of Diablo 2, and it's kind of a convention that's been continuously spit out in ARPGs over the years. And I don't think they were good then. I don't think they're good now. I think it's okay to recognize that some things are worth improving upon, and literal deletion of these mechanics is, I believe, the correct move.
Stygian dolls are the best monsters in the game. You think you're safe, and once they die, they explode, so boom, you're dead. Isn't that nice? I have almost full health, and then I'm instantly dead. Look at it in slow motion. Dead. Yep, wasn't that nice?
I largely feel the same way about hard CC on the player. This is in terms of, for example, freezing. I think this is very telling. We've got this new mechanic to mess around with here in Path of Exile 2. These charms, right? Now, I have heard, in fairness, that these are kind of meh anyway. But wouldn't you believe it? What do you think the first one I'm going to throw on is? Of course. Of course. You know, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here because I'm a little bit of an older gamer. So back in the early 2000s, late 1990s, there was a common trope in a lot of RPG games that were, it was called instant death effects. And essentially what this was, I'm thinking in terms of kind of the wizardry games, the Might and Magic series. Sometimes you'd have a monster, let's say a Minotaur, that will have built into its status effect dispersal, things it can do to you, a small percent chance, just a dice roll, that it could have some kind of execute or decapitate mechanic that would just instantly kill you, instantly dead. Like every attack, there's a 1-2% chance that you're just gone. And as you can imagine, this didn't go over very well. And these mechanics were continuously criticized because it's challenge in the most shallow of ways. Just a small percent chance that you just lose. And I find it baffling, frankly, that the freezing, hard stun, continuously being stunned, stun locked, electrocute, these mechanics have maintained themselves over the years, because if there is anything more frustrating than a small dice roll chance to instantly die, it's a small dice roll chance to just slowly watch myself die. These are yet another mechanics from a period where tabletop RPGs would have you frozen for a single round, not in a game where being frozen and things attack 30 times a second. This is the equivalent to losing many, many rounds of your turn. It's insanity. And it is the type of mechanic where I will trade literally anything. I will trade my honestly, take my chest slot, take my boots, take my wallet, whatever it is you offer me as the solution to this problem you've created, I will trade away because I just don't want to be frozen. It is the problems to a solution that I have no agency to solve, and there are several problems to solutions that can be good in a game. As an example, talk about the resistances. I'm totally fine with them. I realize they've already kind of eased up on this a little bit, but I'm relatively okay with resistances being harder to achieve in the game. I will talk a little bit about crafting and being able to switch resistances because I dislike that. But in general, I have agency in this. If I find a chess piece during the campaign and it's got a lot of lightning resistance and one's got a lot of fire resistance, and I'm going into a boss fight where I've got a lot of fire damage coming at me, well, I can choose to switch the chess piece around. I have agency, mana resource. I've got a lot of supports on this skill that I enjoy using, but I'm running out of mana too quickly. I can lower the cost of the skill. I can add mana to my pool. I can grant myself mana recuperation by ways of mana regen or other mechanics. I have agency in how I decide it, not with the freezing. Literally just, I will trade anything, absolutely anything, just to get rid of it. I just don't want it. That is just not, that's a stupid mechanic in my mind. And, every developer seems to have to try their shot at this. 3-4 years ago, Bungie, Destiny 2 is another game I play a lot of. They released their own Bungified version of an ice class in what they called Stasis, where all the typical tropes, the freezing and shattering and these kind of things. And wouldn't you know, the player could become frozen too, and it was a pretty damn hard freeze. And you can imagine how that went over in a game that above all else has a PvP mode. Nobody wanted it. These subclasses had to be toned down so much that, at least within the realm of PvP, they eventually became all but unusable. Because I would literally, and this is, please take this to heart. I want to be clear before anyone yells at me about skill issue. While I dislike the gotcha mechanic of on-death effects, when it comes to freezing, and something that should be apparent but often isn't because of visual clarity, that's the reality there, why can't, if it's a skill check for me to avoid being frozen, why could it not just be high damage? I would literally rather just die. Kill me. Literally, I would rather you just kill me than be frozen. It's just a horrible pacing decision if the only way for me to deal with a mechanic is to just take my hands off the keyboard and wait, or take my hands off the keyboard and wait for things to explode. These are bad mechanics. When you take my autonomy from me, which both of these mechanics do, I am no longer enjoying the experience. Every instance of freeze or electrocute or hard CC on the player should be replaced with things that, if need be, just kill you because it's less frustrating. And every instance of on-death effects should be replaced with something else interesting in the game as a way to engage with combat that might make you think differently about it, like enemies rushing you. That is another example of something that, while I think it was a little overtuned when it came out, I think is overall a good decision. The fact that enemies can rush and enclose you, and that's some way that you might have to maneuver around the combat in the game, I think is a good thing. This is something interesting. On-death effects, being frozen, these things are not interesting. These developers have talked about wanting to make the perfect RPG. In my mind, the perfect RPG does not have autonomy relinquishing mechanics in the game. If all you can do is just wait, I'm frozen, I'm just gonna run to the fridge and grab a snack, then we should take them out. I get that the idea behind freeze is supposed to be that there's a chance to survive it, but in a game where every other white goblin shaman mob or every little bubble boy just blows up and explodes after 2 seconds and one-shots you or can freeze the ground and make it slightly lighter colored in a way that you can barely see. No, these are just instant death effects with more steps.
The crowd control, like the CC, it is completely ridiculous the amount of people throughout the community that are complaining that most of their deaths are coming from basically not being able to move their character. I understand that mobs can either stun you, freeze you, slow you, but there's a limit to it. If you're just constantly being chained, stunned, CC, or whatever the hell you want to call it, it is not no more a fun aspect of the game. It is not a skill no more. It's just basically completely ridiculous, especially for people that play, for example, hardcore characters. Losing their hardcore characters, and a mechanic that basically gives you no possible way of defending is completely ridiculous, okay?
So, I just to be clear here, where I am malleable on a lot of the other things I'm going to talk about, I don't see a good purpose for these in these kind of games at all. I do think that they are archaic decisions that just need to go. With that, I'd like to talk about crafting. And this may be another kind of hot take. Oh, I don't really think the first one's a hot take, but this might be. I do not know if it was a good decision to move to less deterministic crafting. I think that in general, there are a lot of decisions made in this game where you've got two forces that are pushing different directions, and it has left a void in the middle where it feels like things have gone a little bit too far. I can discuss a little bit of that on map size too, but in this context, the game, again, and being the slower, more tactical combat, it does take longer to kill things. I understand that there's some people like Empyrean that take big groups and are still able to just drill through things, but let's be honest, that's not even the average good player. It is still slower. It does still take a longer time to achieve some things. There's less loot on the ground. With all of these things compounding the fact that I have less option in my crafting, it creates a void where I don't have any tools to resolve the things that I need to resolve, even during the campaign. If you were to copy paste this campaign in Path of Exile 1, when I think about my ability to deal with things like corrupted blood, that kind of stuff, it wouldn't be the same thing in Path of Exile 2, but it would certainly be stuff like chaos damage, various resistances, these kind of things. And I am very disappointed that some of the more interesting mystique in the game, like vendor recipes, are gone too. I think vendor recipes were very fun to engage with. I do not think that these are the kind of things that added a lot of confusion to new players. I remember being the new player and the things that confused me. I did not find figuring out things like vendor recipes confusing, or I found them very fun. It's like a tool to add to your tool belt. Oh, I can make this thing and kind of resolve this resistance, and now I've got this tool that I can use. We have very little of that in Path of Exile 2. The latter stages of crafting, even though I realize we do have some omens and some things that are more deterministic, are very poor. The reality is the new essences are very fun to engage with to some extent, but the greater essences are so incredibly rare that you don't really have an opportunity to interact with them much, and runes are permanent. So there's no switching things around. Resistances are permanent, so there's no switching things around. And I think what has really compounded this, my personal take on it, is that I think you could deal without something like a scour. But I think the lack of alteration and changing the Chaos Orb, along with having no scour, is again two things working against each other. I mean, the bases and needing just dozens and dozens of, here's the reality on the bases. The second you need something, it doesn't matter how common it is, you will never find it. And to be clear, we are still missing how many weapon archetypes? I know there's supposed to be swords, axes, maybe daggers. This is only going to get worse. And the fact that there are some things that you are just so compelled to have movement speed on boots. It's not like I feel amazing when I find a pair of boots that have movement speed. I just simply cannot use ones that don't. I think that by and large, the idea that you find tens of thousands of bases, and this is basically meant to replace the alteration orb, is just a really dull gameplay loop. I understand the idea is supposed to be that you are out there engaging in the combat of the game, the mapping content, but I think it's just going to encourage a lot of people to check out and be on the trade website. And I'll be honest, I think that all of this is very fair, first of all. And I say fair as in, I'm not trying to be the player that has all the solutions. I don't know what you need to do to fix it, but I think there's definitely a problem with the tools that we have. They even crop up in the early game, and there needs to be more tools available to us to deal with those things, because the game is challenging enough that feeling like all you can do is just get lucky is not a good feeling and not good game design. So that needs to be dealt with. However, I'm going to dig into a little bit of personal sentiment here. And my kind of like, this is definitely me and not necessarily pointing out a problem, but the crafting in Path of Exile 1 was so good. It was one of the most fun mechanics to engage with in any game that I have ever played. And I do think that they have dumbed down that in favor of maybe new players being able to interact with it. And whereas I think they've really rectified some issues, I think they've kind of missed the mark in why players wouldn't interact with crafting in the first place. I do not believe it was the complexity of crafting, though it is too complex. And we could deal without some of the, I'm not as someone who prided myself in being a crafter. I'm not trying to have a heads up on other people. Please get rid of some of the, because you got the beast crafting and harvest crafting and the fossil crafting and all. Get rid of some of these stations. Get rid of some of the nonsense. There are too many orbs in the game. You could cut down on some of them. Not this many though. I don't think it was the complexity, even in Path of Exile 1, and as complex as it is, that prevented a player from engaging in crafting. If you're a new player in Path of Exile 1 and you find an exalted orb over the course of the campaign, it is not difficult to intellectualize what that exalted orb does. We can see that now with Path of Exile 2. The reason you won't use it is because you're going to go talk to your friends to say, "Oh, don't use that. Oh, you should buy something with that. That's got value." If you don't have any attachment to the game or any friends, you might very well use it. Well, I got this chest piece. It's pretty good. Sure, go ahead, throw something on there. Yeah, make it a little bit better. And it's only later when you've either talked to friends or looked something up online, feel like, "Oh, wow, I'm an idiot. I could have bought a way nicer chest piece than I do on this stupid one." And then it doesn't feel fulfilling. It is scarcity that created the issue in crafting in the first place. And I guess I'm really going to layer on the hot takes today, because I would argue that orbs like the Exalted Orb are still too scarce in Path of Exile 1. I think they might still be a little too scarce in Path of Exile 2. I don't necessarily think this is the type of crafting material that should be so scarce. This was playing the game to me. I think that sitting in a trade website is not necessarily playing the game. And the reality is there are always going to be the type of players that will want to just go out there and blast and earn a bunch of currency and just buy things. But all this really seeks to do is omit an entire portion of the game that a lot of people really enjoyed. And to be clear, I'm not trying to sound super doomer about this. For one thing, I reserve the right to change my mind. Maybe there is some other fine tweaking that can be done to make the system as it stands a little bit more comfortable to engage with. Maybe there are some new avenues to take that I haven't, that they have in mind that I haven't thought of. I'm not going to quit over it, but I do feel a little sad that it has been dumbed down to just a bunch of kind of random slams. I mean, that's really what crafting feels like. And even though, I'm just in mid-maps, obviously I haven't engaged with higher end crafting. It's not like I don't kind of follow the content creation scene and other things. I've been looking at what other people are doing and kind of seeing what higher end crafting looks like. And man, it's just not much. It is not much. So I think maybe this was a poor decision when it comes to trying to make newer players interact with crafting. I think it kind of missed the mark on that. And I don't know that it provides much for the people that really enjoyed that system in the original game. And in speaking of new players, I want to talk. This is something I really want to talk about. Talk about what's new player friendly. You get into the skill tree here, and they've changed the wording a little bit here. This would have been called increased effect of shock, but now we got magnitude. These are still just percentages being multiplied by percentages. Okay, part of what makes the game it kind of adds to the mysticism of it. I get it. We've got you got a 25% of something that you're adding 20% to, so no, it's 30, except the numbers are never normally that easy, so it's actually like 1.77% that you're adding that multiplying by this. This is what makes the game complicated. It's not vendor recipes and crafting. It's this. I remember being a new player and being like, you'd be looking at stuff like, oh, fire damage over time multiplier, and it's like, oh, it applies to this and that, and you got a percentage over here that's a multiplicative multiplier, but this is additive, and you're just looking at stuff like, so does this make me do more damage? So do I do more? Does this make me? Do I do more damage? And you don't know. Magnitude of nobody knows what this is. And you know what, honestly, I gotta say there are some things where I feel like maybe I'm just the peon, but like if you really want to make this more transparent, I press alt on this. Oh, sorry, popped out on my tree. If I press alt on this, I get, okay, I've got the recipe to put it on an amulet. That's fine. But all it has to say is, oh, your shocks cause enemies to take 25% increased damage. If you select this node, that will increase to 32% or whatever. Done deal. Instead of looking at this and being like, what the hell does that mean? What does that mean? Literally just, oh, okay, so they take 7% more damage. Okay. That I understand. You know, Diablo 3, I think, is a good example of this. And like, look, I agree with most of people's sentiments who like Path of Exile when it comes to Diablo 3. Frankly, I think there's a lot of things the game does really well, too. It's a perfect game for me and my wife to sit on the couch and play, and I don't really got to think about stuff. Neither does she, because most of the gear, you get new gear, it's just big number, get bigger. And you go rinse and repeat over and over again. But one of the things I do feel like is actually worth note here is that when it comes all to the stats in that game and the various things that they do, I understand completely what they do. There is no question that I understand what the stat does on my character. In this, if I look on the stat, on the character sheet, I'm gonna say, oh, how much, so what's my chance to crit? Oh, I have a 60% chance to crit. And then in Path of Exile, it's like, well, you got a 5% base chance, but you got this thing over here that's adding 2.55% to the base, and then you got your 40 times more multiplier, which is multiplicative, plus your 100% increase, which is additive with the other 20%, but don't forget, if you're standing more than 6 feet away, then you got another 50% increase for the... This is what makes it complicated. This is what's new player unfriendly. And I'm not saying you even have to do anything about it. This does not have to be a game for everyone. But I do think it's a little ridiculous that we have dumbed down things in the game that don't really need to be dumbed down in favor of keeping systems that are clearly hard to understand, intentionally mystified. And it comes down to like unique descriptions too, where you're reading a bunch of stuff on the uniques and the stats and this and that, and the other things are very ominous, like you leave a trail of fire. Okay. Does it deal damage? Is it just aesthetic? Is it a hit? Does it do that? Does it scale with fire damage over time multiplier? Does it not scale at all? Is it just a thing that just does what it does at base? Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. Do you know? Nobody knows. Path of Building knows. That is what makes the game hard to understand. The most frustration I had as a new player, which honestly was fine to overcome for me. I am the type of player that would like this game. But the most frustration I had is I just want to know, does this make me do more damage? It was not finding the vendor recipes. It was not engaging with the crafting. Those things were fun to figure out. It was, I don't understand what this even does. There is this amazing system in this game called tiering. For those of you who don't know, because some of you probably haven't made it to this point in the game, as you get into like kind of like the mid of maps, kind of like, I don't know, mid-tier maps to kind of the latter ones, you will begin to find gear that has a tier number associated with it. It'll be right on the gear when it drops. You can do this on magic or rare items. It'll be like tier 1, 2, I think it goes up to like 5. And essentially what that does is it makes it so that item either re-rolls low tiers or explicitly makes it so that you can't get certain affixes on the item, like thorns on chest and light radius. So that item has a very good chance to roll really well. But you don't even get to experience this until like tier 8 maps. Why? You should be getting this stuff by at least Cruel. I mean, this should be the kind of stuff that is the reward for achieving challenging things like beating act bosses and stuff. That's what... Ground loot can be good if you make ground loot good. Killing the crafting system or making it so that everything's just a bunch of gamba isn't necessary to make ground look good. If anything, that can accommodate some of the spaces that you are missing, which even when ground loot is good, you still won't have. And no amount of crafting, well, certainly, there's certainly a level of crafting you could get to where things are far too common and there would be no point doing anything else but crafting an item. But I just don't know if moving away from the conventional use of chaos, of removing the alteration orb, I don't know if this was the right decision. Because frankly, I do feel a lot like I just don't have the tools I need to interact with early on. And I feel like the entire issue of what made crafting so impossible to interact with in Path of Exile 1 wasn't the complexity in a lot of these lower level, it was just the scarcity. Where's my ability to change resistances? I wanted that for so long in Path of Exile 1, and it feels like it's just going to be a consistent fight here again. Because I got this armor that's really awesome and should be an upgrade, but it's got lightning res and I don't need that. So here we go again. It's going to be the same struggle through Path of Exile 2, because you can tell they're going exactly the opposite direction. Like, we don't want you to have any of that stuff, and yet it's something that really shouldn't feel bad. I shouldn't feel bad because I got a pair of boots that don't have movement speed, because I got a chest that's got the wrong resistance on it. These are just silly things to not give options to the players. This is hardly offering a bunch of power. It's just offering tools, and we need more tools. So these two things are definitely what I find most concerning. I know everybody is going to have their own feelings on that, but the crafting system being a bit diluted from what it was before, and some of the things that kind of surround crafting, like vendor recipes and such, and the on-death freezing bad mechanics thing that we're still dealing with. But that being said, I am going to rapid fire some other stuff off here. These are not things that I think are so ingrained into the game. I generally think they'll probably touch some of this stuff up, but it's worth throwing my hat in the ring because with GGG you never know, and I still find these things pretty annoying. So first of all, map sustain. I've had a hard time sustaining just tier 5 maps. I really don't feel like content should be... I want to be clear here, guys, that I'm not saying everything should be super common in the game and it should be super easy, all right? I'm really not. That being said, I do feel like content is yet another thing that shouldn't necessarily be scarce. You know, the fragment system to fight bosses in PoE1, for pinnacle type content, that kind of stuff I tend to think is okay. But I'm not so sure that waystones should be scarce. For one thing, talk about new player friendly again, because this game is going to need to sustain itself and get some players. I actually I'm kind of in the 1% here, okay? And I'm not saying I'm excellent at the game. Obviously, I've spent like 150 hours and I've got 3 characters just like barely kind of into the end game and stuff. I'm kind of slow rolling it, but I'm hardly efficient. I'm not an amazing player, but I do watch the content. I'm in it. I watch Crip's video on, oh, you want to take, these nodes so that you can kind of keep your sustain up and you're doing all the... It just feels bad. And I still am having a hard time with it. It feels bad to have to dig into everything you can possibly dig into just to sustain the content that means anything to you. And again, with the not trying to be solution-based, obviously they could do other things to fix this, like just add more that you can to it. Like this tier 5 and 6 have nothing for me. I'm not getting any meaningful upgrades. I get no experience because the maps that I am being compelled to do are like area level 69. This character's 77, 78, whatever. You get nothing. That really just doesn't feel good. So I'd like to see that addressed. The map size, the maps are far too large. They released, again, as of the recording this video, this was like a day or two ago, the patch where they've got the portaling between the checkpoints. This is a bandage. The maps are way too big. And I know, I get that there's probably a lot of effort that went into that, and some of them are very beautiful. So I'm not trying to be condescending about it, but it does feel, it's one of those things again where you got two decisions pushing things apart. You've got, if the maps, if our speed was relatively the same as it was, our ability to pick up movement speed, if we were relatively zoomier like PoE1, then you could have doubled the maps in size, and I think that would have felt great. Some of the maps in Path of Exile 1 feel kind of small. This would be a nice change. But when you have slowed the pacing down and everything, then you could have kept the maps relatively the same size. And I think that would have felt fine, would have felt great. I don't know if doing both at the same time was a good idea. We're just pushing so far in two directions. And this is probably particularly felt in the end game, where some maps feel all but like unplayable because they are just so big. But I started to feel this way like around Act 6, so Act 3 Cruel. There are some maps in the latter end of that act that are just so overwhelmingly large. You get this quest where you get this heart in your inventory and you got to find this like sacrificial altar, find a dagger and stuff. Sorry for the spoilers, whatever. There's one of the quests that I think offers some resistance or something. You need to finish it. And one of my characters, I just could not find this thing. So I'm circling around this map trying to find this place. And you can easily spend 6, 7, 8, 10 real minutes when you are not able to find something on the map. So they just feel overwhelmingly large at times. And I definitely think there's other solutions that you could do here too, because frankly, if every map really felt like 2, that'd probably be fine. But I want to be clear here that these little like secret rooms with you get some gold and a couple chests, a yellow or a blue chest, this just is not cutting it for me. I do not think that that's particularly interesting. I think the interesting thing in the game are rare and unique enemies. Not only is that where the reward is, you can't buff chests to the extent. I think I found like two items over the course of however many campaigns I did that had like nice items in them. Said, you know, it's rare and unique enemies you want to fight. I mean, I don't really. Maybe we should make some sub bosses or something. Kind of really instill the Dark Souls aura here. That'd be awesome to find. I mean, that'd be super killer to like walk into one of these secret rooms and there's like a secret hidden sub boss or something like that. I don't know. There's probably other things you could do with it, but I just wanna say this too. I understand when I'm being critical of the campaign, we don't have the latter half of it. So it could be shorter than the first half, and you know that would definitely help out. But I just want you guys to keep this in mind too. We are going to play this game. I've already played it like 5, 6, however many times over. We're going to play this campaign over and over again. You know that GGG is not going to give us the alternate character button to just auto to maps. It's not going to happen. They don't believe in that. So keep in mind, you will be doing this campaign over and over again. Map size is gonna matter with that, especially because map size doesn't even feel good in maps. So especially during the campaign, I really think, you know, while I appreciate some of the design in it, the graphics of this game are beautiful. That is a wonderful upgrade. I do think we need to shrink this. I mean, you could cut these things in half, and I think that would better go with the current flow and pacing of the game. The dodge roll, this is another thing that in Crip's review he talked about. I don't necessarily agree that I don't like it tied to the mechanics and stuff. I think it's kind of fun to like dodge bosses and stuff and slams. I'm not big on one-shottiness either, but like, you know, that some mechanics might rely on it a little bit. That might be fine. My take here is I just think it feels bad, really. The dodge roll, I mean, like, you've probably gotten used to it by now, but most of you, like, tell me if I'm crazy here. When you first started using it, did you not think, like, you adapt, but I hate to make a Dark Souls reference here because I guess they really asked for it on this one, though. Come on, let's be real. But it feels almost like a DS1 heavy roll. It just doesn't feel good. And I got news, all right? This is one of those mark my words things, but I've started using Blink on this character. And I will say, especially as we get to a point where things are a little bit more figured out. We've probably got Path of Building 2, and there's better items available on the market, all of that stuff. I would suspect that every high-end build is going to use Blink. It's going to become one of those things that they didn't want, a skill which you are compelled to, is it incumbent upon you to use. And I think part of that is that it's, well, and don't get me wrong, they may just nerf Blink, frankly, keeping all other things the same. I think that they would almost have to because it is incredibly powerful. There may be some boss fights where it's not actually in your best interest to use it, but you can easily click it off and then pick something else of equal spirit cost, like cast on shock, cast on freeze. And for everything else, for mapping, especially for Sanctum, Blink is just insanely powerful. And honestly, if you don't feel like there's anything wrong with the dodge roll, I'd encourage you to try out Blink, and I doubt you'll feel the same. And I understand you're spending spirit. It's supposed to be an upgrade. But there's just like it's not only like you get greater distance traveled and it's a teleport with phases through things. It's not even just all that, but the little annoyances that you deal with in ARPGs when you are navigating an isometric domain that still has these senses of elevation and stuff, and you know you get caught on a rock that's like you don't feel like you should get caught on because you just walked over one that was like 3 times as high, which there is a lot of that too they need to fix anyway. That's not necessarily all supposed to be like that, but you just don't even worry about it. You just teleport out of the way. Or it's just, you know, that you need to get up to a ledge somewhere. You just teleport there. So I'm not saying the dodge roll has to do all that either. I don't know what the solution is exactly. I will say it does feel kind of short to me. And I don't know if this is an aesthetics thing, but it feels like the animation kind of lags at the end. That's what gives it that heavy weightiness feel. And don't get me wrong, I understand the fact that the idea is that you are moving a relatively short distance very quickly, whereas you would remove a medium or long distance faster otherwise. Because if you don't make it that way, then people are just rolling all over the place. And you can't have that either. I mean, you can't not have it, but I doubt GGG would want something like that in the game. So there's probably some give and take to be had there, but I definitely think it needs to be tweaked. It just feels bad. And I really, really dislike the gem system. Okay, so it's one of those things where, okay, so I get that some of you, this is almost like embarrassing, right? Like it took me this long. Some of you pros out there, I'm sure your inventory looks 5 times this bad. why with the okay, here's something that a lesson that I think should have been learned from PoE1, because my biggest issue with the gem system there, it wasn't just the red, green, blue, any of that. I like the links and stuff. I got very used to that and accustomed to it. I like that, although I don't mind this new menu either. I'm not really that this is fine, this is okay to navigate, it's all right. But the gems being physical in the first place has always been annoying, and I'm gonna, even if you hear me say that and you're like, oh no, it's not annoying, just let me, maybe you'll feel otherwise anyway, but just hear me out here. Stay with me for a second. We already are reaching a point in this game. Another thing I've heard GGG say, that they don't want, shouldn't have to have a loot filter. The game shouldn't need a loot filter, a good ARPG. We're already practically there. And I think a big reason for that is because we've got too much stuff on the ground already. Gems needlessly add to things on the ground, and I know you could make the argument when I'm already complaining about just how many I've got here, well, just stop picking them up. You don't need all that. Well, then why are they there? It is a needless thing to put on the ground. I don't understand. I've said I don't want to be solution-based. I'm just going to offer my take on a solution here. Why couldn't you just learn your first skill at level 1, and then learn one every 7 levels until level 70, and then by the end, you've got 10 of them, which is one more than you can even assign, so you got a flex slot. Why not? Like, I don't know that them being physical is good. And with the PoE1 thing, okay, hear me out if you're a PoE1 veteran. How many times you're doing a heist wherever you're doing, and you're picking up like a random level 20 or 21 corrupted gem on the ground, like a random Arctic armor or something. Who knows? And you're thinking, should I keep this? Might I need this? Maybe there's a build where maybe I might use it. I don't know. Just throw it in the stash, or you throw it for sale. It'll probably never sell, because like some gems are easy to sell. Other ones, even if you're competing on the price, they'll just sit there forever. It's just needless. It's needless clutter. I really don't understand why you just can't learn the skills. They could make like a trainer NPC if they wanted to, and you could just reassign your skills the same way you do anything else. Just go to a vendor and respec them. That's already what we're doing with, Atlas, the passive skill tree. I don't know why it couldn't work the same way. So I guess, look at me, I am offering solutions. But I just feel like physical gems was already the annoyance, more to me than anything else. I don't even know that like picking up your skills even makes that much sense. So that's another thing I'm kind of frustrated with. And for the record, I have heard, Zizarin and some other people talk about being able to 3-to-1 them, because the ability to gain power through your gems has kind of been lost in the game too. And I totally get that. I do think that there should be better ways to kind of out-level instead of just complete random get lucky, to feel like you can gain some power up if you're struggling with content in the game. But I don't know why your skills can't just level with you, and that just make it easy enough to switch. You could still do stuff like alternate qualities if you want to, just allow a little drop down of the selection you want to pick. I get it takes one more thing out of the game. It's not necessarily adding to like, oh, I got something special, but maybe you could find a different way to make things special. Maybe not everything needs to be an item that drops on the ground. And especially for the gems, I just feel like I'm being absolutely inundated with all of these gems, and I'm not nearly as far as probably some of you guys are. So I'm not too fond of that. I think I'm just going to call it, I guess one last thing. This is such a small thing, but I just feel like it's going to nag me if I don't mention it. The zoom level feels weird. Anybody else feel like you're too close to your character? I don't feel like that's super immersive, and it's not awful, okay? It's just like 7, 8, 10% further away, please. I just feel like I'm being pushed too close. I feel like maybe that was a decision based on immersion, because I'd have to compare, but I feel like I am being forced to be closer than I am in PoE1, and I don't like that. I understand that being able to see more is actually offering some level of tactical advantage. That is a power thing, but I'm not asking for the world here. I just feel like I'm like 5% too close, and I just keep scrolling the wheel back like I'm just too close. So anyway, that's kind of small. There are a lot of wonderful things that the game has done incredibly right. The boss fights are incredible in this game, and I mean that as extremely high praise. I talked about Destiny a little bit earlier. That is one of those things where that series has continuously been on the brink of destruction, partly because Bungie just seems to make bad decision after good decision after bad decision. It's like one step forward, 2 steps back. So, but I gotta say, I think a couple of times what's really saved that series has been the boss design. Boss design is just everything for games like this. And I think the boss design is incredible. I will say, I guess I'm going to add some criticism here too. That's another thing I'd like more of. I'm not sure if I'm really fond of the 1 and 4 thing. I feel like I oftentimes, and again, I've only probably done like 60 or 70 maps. I feel like I go like 6, 7, 8 in a row and don't see a boss. And that's a shame. I don't think that's something you should drip feed because it's the absolute most stellar content this game has. And I mean that as high praise. The music is wonderful in this game. I'm not trying to put down the music from PoE1, but it does feel like they've kind of always veered away from the really typical fantasy anthemic thing. And some of the boss themes and stuff in this feel like they're a complete other direction with that. Even the little like hideout theme, I've probably got it going on underneath because it's just so good. The little da 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 da. Oh, it's so good. There's a lot of things to really love about the game. So I know I can be kind of a passionate person. I'm not angry. You know, there's very few decisions that could be made that would destroy the game for me. I will probably enjoy it either way. But I do think that in general, if I had to sum up kind of like my review of it, it feels like there are some steps backward. GGG has already experimented and tried a lot of the things they're kind of trying with this game that already kind of didn't succeed in Path of Exile 1. And while I can understand they have a vision for the game and maybe they're like, no guys, this could really be good. It could really be good. On-death effects are totally fine. They can really be good, but like they're just not. And I feel like there is some really, there's some really stubborn design to this that feels regressive. And I want PoE2 to be unique. I don't want a copy. I really don't. But I do feel like in some capacity, it's okay to learn from some of those things that players just tend to not enjoy engaging with. But I just don't know that we need to keep trying the same things over and over that kind of you already have gotten the feedback on some of this stuff that's just not fun. So anyway, PoE2. It's a pretty darn good game. It feels almost shallow to, you know, with the ocean of early access titles that we get that are not worth their salt in comparison to the mass majority of even AAA releases that come out nowadays. I mean, the game would be like a masterpiece, but you know, this isn't in a vacuum. This is from the developer who made the original Path of Exile, which is, I think, one of the best RPGs ever made. And I think with holding it to that standard and that level of criticism, it's got a little ways to go. You know, I'd say it's a 7 out of 10 early access that stands to be a 10 out of 10 release. It's a very good game that is held back a little bit by some bullheaded design decisions. And hopefully they move it in a good direction. That being said, obviously this review is aimed a little bit more at people who have played Path of Exile 1, probably even this game a little bit to some extent, but for God's sakes, if you haven't tried the game, like, please, you know, I wouldn't even worry about the early access thing. This game has hundreds, if not thousands of hours of content in it. And just the combat alone, the boss fights alone is worth the price of admission. It is a very fun and good experience. So I want to leave you guys off with a little bit of a thought experiment because it's something I was kind of mulling over in my head as I was thinking about what I wanted to say about the crafting. And follow me for a second here. Obviously, these games have like an internal difficulty slider, right? That's in the developer can kind of mold the difficulty based on what players are able to achieve in the game. So, with all things equal, you got these two universes of Path of Exile, or whatever game, just an anonymous random RPG. And in one, you're able to achieve like 90% of the best item possible through your crafting. And in the other, the difficulty slider is moved up, so it's a little bit harder, but you can achieve the absolute perfect item. So, all other things equal, the actual experience of owning the item should be the same. The power you get from it should be the same. But it's still really not. Owning the actual perfect item, it's just more meaningful. And I think there's something very special about that line that you kind of go through in your head where you're thinking about that special item, that perfect item that you've crafted to perfection, added that kind of special finishing touch to. I think there's something just extra meaningful about that. And yeah, maybe I'm not alone in that. Maybe it's kind of a me thing, but I'll kind of let you guys let me know what you think. I will say that I do think they're aiming more towards that like 80, 90%. Don't get me wrong, there will be like mirror tier items in this game. I mean, hell, they could be found with how good the tiering system has been, but more than likely, the Omen crafting is definitely strong enough to achieve that. But not by even me, which is crazy because I spend a lot of time in these games, but the amount of currency that's going to be necessary to achieve anything close to what we could make in Path of Exile 1 is just going to be absolutely monumental compared to the kind of tippy top that you could get in the predecessor. So I don't know. Personally, I find the perfection more meaningful, even if otherwise the experience is the same. You can let me know what you think. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. If you're subscribed to this channel, it's probably because I did a video a while back with the intention that I was going to do more and I didn't get around to it, but I've got a little bit of time now that hopefully I'll be able to do some more, so I really do appreciate it. The support. If you like it, you can like the video. Dislike it, you can dislike it. And, you know, a subscription would mean something to me. And with that, you know, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.